On a bright yet breath-chilling morning, in the center of the city's towering financial district, where glass skyscrapers pierce the sky and polished cars whispered along immaculate streets, a little girl with dusty cheeks and exhausted eyes pushed open the enormous brass doors of the Grand Crest Bank. Her name was Arya Nolan, and she moved with the hesitant steps of someone who had been carrying the weight of the world far too long for someone her age. In her small, trembling hands, she clutched a worn, faded bank card, gripping it with a kind of desperation reserved for those holding on to their very last piece of hope. Sunlight poured through the bank's cathedral-like windows, spilling across marble floors and towering columns. But even in all that brilliance, Arya seemed like a fragile shadow wandering through a world not meant for her. She was painfully out of place among the gleaming chandeliers, the sharp-dressed executives, and the quiet hum of enormous wealth. Heads turned as she stepped forward, not with kindness, but with confusion, surprise, and the sort of judgment people cast without thinking. They saw a child with worn-out jeans, a shirt too thin for the weather, and shoes nearly falling apart. They saw a problem, an interruption, an oddity in a temple of money. But Arya wasn't looking for sympathy. She wasn't looking for attention. She wanted something heartbreakingly simple. She wanted to check her balance. Her journey to this moment hadn't started with courage or confidence. It had begun with pure, aching desperation. For 2 days she had been wandering the city, clutching only a few coins she had collected by sheer luck. She had slept sitting up beside a bus stop. She had eaten nothing but a small pack of crackers someone had left behind on a bench. Strangers ignored her. Some avoided her gaze entirely. Others looked at her the way one looks at a stray animal, pitying but unwilling to help. Her mother had passed away years ago, leaving Arya with only a handful of memories and one instruction she never understood. Keep this card safe. One day you might need it. For years, the card had felt meaningless, an object she couldn't use, couldn't interpret, and couldn't bring herself to throw away because it was the last physical thing her mother had ever given her. But now, with hunger gnawing at her stomach and loneliness tightening around her like a cold rope, she finally decided to learn whether the card held anything at all, whether her mother had left her even a tiny miracle. Inside the bank, the world was buzzing with an energy Arya had never witnessed before. Screens flashed endless lines of numbers. Charts moved like living creatures, and the air carried the clipped, confident voices of workers in tailored suits rushing from desk to desk with binders, tablets, and steaming cups of coffee. Wealth lived in every corner of the building, from the expensive carpet to the gold-trimmed elevator doors. And seated in the center of all this power was Maxwell Grant. Maxwell Grant was the kind of man newspapers called a financial titan. He was one of the wealthiest investment magnates in the city, a man known for winning, for dominance, and for living in a world far removed from ordinary people. His laughter echoed across the trading floor as he discussed market trends with his advisors. He looked untouchable, invincible, like someone who had never known a day of struggle. But then his gaze drifted toward the customer service counters, where Arya now stood, timidly pushing her faded card toward a banker named Elena Rohr. Elena froze, unsettled by the sight of such a small, fragile girl standing alone in the opulent lobby. People around them started whispering, some with concern, others with irritation at the interruption. Arya's voice was almost inaudible as she explained what she needed. Elena, moved by the child's exhaustion and determination, offered her a gentle smile and guided her toward Maxwell's section, where the bank's most powerful terminals could access deep archives of long-abandoned or unusual accounts. Arya didn't understand any of this. She only followed because she wanted, finally, to know if she had anything in this world. Maxwell watched their approach with bemused curiosity. A child at his desk? He assumed this was some kind of publicity stunt, maybe a mistake, or a meaningless errand that shouldn't have reached him. He leaned back comfortably, smirking, as Arya reached up and placed a card in front of him. An old debit card. A homeless child. A billionaire. The moment almost seemed comedic to him. But Arya wasn't smiling. Her small hands trembled. Her eyes darted around the huge room, absorbing the disapproving stares and the whispers. She wanted answers. Only that. She wanted one moment of truth in a life full of uncertainty. The entire atmosphere shifted when Maxwell inserted the card into his terminal. The smirk vanished from his face. His eyebrows pulled together slowly, deeply. He typed again. And again. His advisor stepped closer, confused at first, then quickly turning pale with shock. Elena leaned forward, holding her breath. The balance displayed on Maxwell's screen was not empty. It was not a handful of dollars, nor a modest savings. It was enormous, jaw-dropping, life-changing, unbelievable. Maxwell stared at the figure, realizing that this fragile girl standing before him was, in fact, one of the wealthiest individuals he had ever encountered. Not by a small margin, but by a margin large enough to render the entire room silent. Arya had no idea why everyone suddenly stopped breathing. She didn't understand the string of digits glowing on the display. She only saw Maxwell looking at her not like an inconvenience, but like someone important, someone who deserved respect. What she didn't know was this. Years ago, her mother had worked at a small community center. There she met Victor Hale, a quiet, aging entrepreneur who had lost his family and spent his final years searching for connection. Arya's mother cared for him during his darkest days, and in gratitude, he secretly created a trust in Arya's name. Year after year, the fund grew with interest and careful investments Victor had arranged. Neither Arya nor her mother ever knew its true purpose. Victor had hoped that someday, maybe far in the future, that little girl would find her way to the gift he built for her. A gift meant to protect her when life became too harsh. Today was that day. Maxwell felt something he hadn't felt in years. Humility. Genuine, overwhelming humility. The child he had quietly mocked only moments earlier now possessed a fortune that could rival some of the wealthiest private clients the bank had ever served. The air in the room shifted. People who had been whispering in irritation now stared with stunned disbelief. Executives paused mid-step. Even the traders behind the glass booths slowed their movements, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Maxwell rose slowly from his seat. Gone was the arrogance, the dismissive smirk, the amused impatience. In its place was a deep, respectful stillness. For the first time, he looked at Arya not as a disruption, not as a mystery, not as a stray swept into a world too rich for her, but as someone whose life had just changed forever. Arya blinked at him, confused by the sudden shift. She didn't understand wealth. She didn't understand trust funds or investment portfolios or compounded interest. She only understood survival, day to day, moment to moment. And now the most powerful man in the room was standing before her as gently as if she were royalty. Elena Roar slowly knelt beside Arya and explained everything in soft, steady words. She told her about Victor Hale, the kind man from the community center, the man her mother had cared for, the man who had quietly ensured Arya would never be abandoned by the world. As the truth sank in, Arya's lips parted in disbelief. Her eyes filled until tears spilled down her cheeks. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. For the first time, she wasn't alone. And Maxwell saw that. He saw something powerful and fragile in that moment. A reminder that wealth doesn't always begin with luck or privilege. Sometimes it begins with kindness, with a single act of love that grows quietly in the dark and today it is needed most. The bank staff scrambled into action. A private room was prepared. Security was notified, not to remove Arya, but to protect her. Maxwell placed a bottle of water beside her shaking hands. He ordered food to be brought immediately. He arranged for his top financial advisors to meet with social services and ensure Arya would be protected and properly cared for, while the legal system appointed a guardian who could manage her sudden inheritance responsibly. He didn't do any of this out of pity. He did it because for once, he recognized that power didn't belong to him. Not today. Today it belonged to a quiet girl with dusty cheeks, a torn gray shirt, and a bank card her mother had told her never to lose. The transformation was incredible. People who had judged her only minutes earlier now watched her with awe. They whispered about the miracle they had witnessed. They stared at the billionaire who had once laughed at everything except himself, and who now stood beside Arya with the gentleness of someone changed forever. Arya held the card tightly, the card that had just rewritten her entire life story. She felt warmth rising inside her, something she hadn't felt in years, safety. When she finally stepped out of Grand Crest Bank later that afternoon, sunlight washed over her like a blessing. The city looked different, not because it had changed, but because she had. Her steps were small yet steady, and on her face grew a hesitant, beautiful smile. A smile that had been missing for far too long. She thought about her mother, the woman who had loved her fiercely even with so little to give, a woman who had left behind one final gift, a gift hidden in plain sight, a gift powerful enough to lift her from despair and place her on a path filled with possibility. The world could be cruel, the world could be cold, but sometimes, tucked away in unexpected places, there were miracles left behind by people who cared. Miracles that waited quietly, patiently, for the day they were needed most. And that day had finally come. As Arya walked into the golden afternoon, she held her mother's gift close to her heart. Her life was no longer defined by fear, no longer shaped by hunger or loneliness. Today, her story turned a page. Today, she stepped into a future her mother had dreamed for her. A future built on kindness, love, and the power of a single moment that changed everything. And if this story reminds you that compassion can transform a life, remember to share it. Because sometimes hope isn't just found, it's passed forward one heart at a time.